Hi there, you guys. So sorry again. I keep saying that every single time I do one of these reviews. It's been a long time. I honestly have just been in school working on my thesis. I have a job now, and things are very hectic. I haven't been able to sit down and do a review, but I have been seeing quite a few movies, especially a lot of horror films lately. So there's a couple I want to talk about, but I think I'm going to break them up into separate reviews because I think they're easier to watch, especially if you just want to sort of go watch one specific review instead of watching three reviews like the one I did a little while ago with Great Gatsby and World War Z and Star Trek. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of spend the next little bit just talking about a whole bunch of movies that I've seen over the last couple of months and just sort of give maybe like 10-15 minute reviews for each of them. I know my reviews tend to be a little long, and it's part of the candid nature of my reviews and me just coming up with stuff on the top of my head to talk about. So it might be a little tricky, but hopefully I can get quite a few of them done. So the movies in particular that I want to talk about over the course of the next couple of videos, and you can skip to whichever one you want. This is just a small prelude before the one I'm actually going to start with, which I haven't even really decided which one I want to start with yet. I'm going to talk about Carrie, which I saw opening night, I believe. I'm going to talk about Thor: The Dark World, which I've seen twice now. I'm going to talk about The Purge, which I saw a couple weeks ago via stream. I'm also going to talk about Insidious 2, as well as The Conjuring. There's a lot of movies for me to talk about, and they're all ones that I really wanted to do reviews for, but I just didn't have the time or the ability to sit down and just do a review at the time, so I'm just going to power through them right now and give you guys my opinions on these movies. So the very first movie I'm going to talk about is Thor: The Dark World, and the reason I'm going to start with this one is because it is the freshest movie in my memory, because I saw it both tonight and I saw it on opening night, which was last Thursday. Now, for my previous reviews, you guys can pretty much garner that I'm a huge target for these Marvel movies. They're the movies that I tend to look the most forward to in the year. I'm so excited for the next Captain America movie. I'm so excited for X-Men Days of Future Past. I'm excited for Guardians of the Galaxy, and that's a comic I didn't even read all that much. Like, Guardians of the Galaxy is probably the franchise or the series of comics that I know the least about, but it still looks good and it still looks like it'll be relatively entertaining, just based on the track record that Marvel has. Thor: The Dark World is another one of those movies that I was greatly anticipating, and it honestly did not disappoint. This wasn't a really fun movie to watch, and I honestly found that if you were the type of person that did not fully enjoy the first Thor movie, you'll probably like this one. I think the major issues people have with the first movie is the type of plot that the first movie is, which is very much a fish out of water story. I can see people not really enjoying that. Thor is probably the hardest character out of the Avengers to write for and to get a mainstream audience to understand and appreciate as a superhero. His, I think, took the most time to get to that point where people would actually take it seriously. But the thing is, it is so ridiculous and it is so campy to an extent that they have to understand that they can't go too serious with something like this, because then it'll be boring and it'll look ridiculous. So at least if they have some fun with it, it still makes it entertaining while still having its serious moments. And I think this movie takes itself as a little bit more campy. I feel like it has a little bit more of the feel that the Avengers movie had, where it definitely has its really heavy, dark moments. And for now, I'm going to avoid spoilers, but it has its dark moments and it has its really emotional moments. But at the same time, they're counteracted by humor. And a lot of people are going to think, well, is it the same humor as the first movie, where basically it's a lot of side characters and it's a lot of mainly Darcy. I actually want to talk about Darcy in particular because there's like nobody that likes this character. And honestly, I didn't really like her all that much either in the first movie. I thought she was genuinely just a waste of space. I thought this is a character that doesn't really do much for the plot other than give colorful commentary. In this one, she is given more to do, but it's still that sort of, every so often it does sort of grind at you a little bit because it's said in a way where it's like, oh my god, please just shut the bitch up. But she does at least have a little bit more to do this time around. She is actually responsible for getting certain characters together. She is um, a little bit more active in her role, especially her role as an intern. Like the last time, I think she pointed out one thing, and that was it. Everything else she did in that movie was pretty much you could toss her out completely. You probably would have lost nothing. This time around, she does actually have more of an active role. It's not much more active, but honestly, I don't find her personality, despite the fact that I don't think it contributes anything to the story, her personality is a lot more tolerable this time around, I find. Are there bad jokes? Yes, of course. It's what we expect. But the thing is, they've already introduced her as a character. To keep up with continuity alone, they couldn't just kind of toss her out altogether. So while I don't love the Darcy character, I can't say I absolutely hate her either. Like, she's not a character that I absolutely despise. Like, sure, the movie probably would just go on without her, but it's not like I feel like it brings it down that much. And I feel like if she wasn't there, there'd be certainly less moments where there's that certain levity that these characters need, that this universe needs to sort of lighten the mood a little bit. Because there are two very specific scenes that I talk about when I talk about the dark moments in this movie. And immediately after both of these moments, they pretty much cut to an extremely ridiculous and almost inappropriate scene. Um, and it's really awkward to kind of go from heavy drama with big emotions to I should be laughing. And it's sort of weird because I almost feel guilty for laughing after these scenes, because these scenes are really really big in terms of what it means to certain characters and what it means to the overall plot. And to feel like they just threw somebody in there to make you laugh immediately afterwards feels almost wrong. But overall, the humor, I think, balances out the movie. There's a lot more humor in this movie than just Darcy and those characters. I think they're small in terms of the overall plot. They're not as important as the overall story that's going on, and I think that there are other characters that have much better moments that are much funnier in this movie. Moving beyond that, I think this movie is really well written. I think it has a really good story. The villain is almost a bit of a toss away. He's not extremely memorable. I feel like for the story that it is, which I think is better than the fish out of water story that we had in the last Thor movie, this is it just sort of feels like a repeat of the Avengers in a way, because it's like, you know, bad guy wants to take over the world or just slash destroy world, heroes must stop it. That's basically what it is. It's the same thing as the Avengers. I feel like the Avengers did it better, so it's for me it's certainly not on the same level as the Avengers, but it still has that same level of enjoyability that, you know, the fight scenes are really well choreographed. I'm really engaged with what's going on. I don't feel like I'm wasting my time. I still think it's, with these types of comic book movies, the main point is to have a sense of enjoyment out of it and have a sense of feeling the world and feeling these grand places and feeling these characters in particular, which I think Marvel has done a really good job in maintaining their characters from the comic book series. So a lot of the issues I would normally have with a lot of comic book movies have already been extinguished just by the fact that Marvel has been really, really interestingly building up all these worlds and all these universes. The thing I like more about this movie, and the reason I like it more than the original Thor movie, there's a couple of things. I like the production design and the makeup and costume work in this movie a hell of a lot more. The hair and the costumes in this movie look more, I want to say, authentic, because Asgard in general kind of feels more like if you took our medieval era in sort of like European and of course Viking culture and everything like that. If you took those eras of our history and you kind of put a Star Wars throw into it, so there's a bit of a sci-fi element in there. That's how it always kind of felt to me. But in the first Thor movie, it felt more sci-fi than it did authentic. It didn't feel nearly as human, I think, as it should have. This time around, the hair looks more realistic, the costumes look more authentic. Asgard, you can breathe, you can see mountains, you can see people eating and running and training and courtyards, and and mountain ranges and ocean, and like there's just so many more places that they go in this movie other than just, you know, throne room and then feast room and then vault, because those are pretty much the only places we saw in Asgard the first time around. This time we get to see so many more places, and we get a much better feel of what Asgard is like overall, just from living from day to day, versus, you know, the two scenes we had from the first movie, really. So I think the production design, while still led heavily from the original production design, is far more established this time around. It feels more like a real place, and it's just so much more interesting, I think, to watch. I think added to that, the director of the film, I totally forget his name now, but he's a director that has also done a couple of episodes for Game of Thrones. I have not seen Game of Thrones, but I know the aesthetic of Game of Thrones, and this totally feels like it. And it makes perfect sense as to why I made all those points about how it feels more authentic, because Game of Thrones very much has that sort of like rough and dirty kind of feel, like, or you know, if you see people fighting, you know, you see smudges of dirt on them. Their hair isn't always out this glowing yellow, golden, perfect. Thor looks like he fights. He ties his hair away that you would expect him to wear it when he goes into battle. Everything just makes more sense, I think, this time around. So getting into specific plot, I am gonna have to talk about major spoilers in this movie, just because they're the parts I think everyone talks about and thinks about in this film. And the two are basically the death of Thor's mother and Loki's mother, Frigga, and the death slash comeback of Loki. Now I'm going to talk about Frigga first. I thought that her death in the movie was so emotional and so powerful. This is a character that we didn't see all that much in the first Thor movie, and only had maybe about 3 to 4 scenes leading up to her big scene when she dies in the movie. She's not extremely active in the series, but you feel such a connection to her. And Rene Russo does such a good job at portraying her and putting such emotion into her portrayal of this character that you feel how she feels as a mother to see her children acting the way that they do about their situation. The fact that Loki so desires the throne and Thor just doing the best that he can with what he has. She sees both her children struggling and fighting different demons. She genuinely has emotions for both of them. I genuinely feel that she is the type of character that when parents, you know, are asked by their children, who do you love more? I think that when they say, no, I love both my children equally, I think she's that type of parent. I do think that she is that type of parent that genuinely cannot pick between her two children, despite the fact that Loki is definitely has his heart in the wrong place a lot of the time. She still loves him unconditionally, and she still sees hope in him, versus Thor, which I think she has more of that like sort of genuine pride in. Not necessarily because he's the one that's bred for the throne, but because he does have this sense of honor and integrity, which is mainly what he learned in the last film. So she feels like a well-rounded character, and so we genuinely feel her loss when she dies. And that funeral scene is just beautiful. Like, they have her funeral scene right after. It is the most emotional part in the movie. I know a lot of people will be like, oh, you'd think Loki's death would have been more emotional. Surprisingly, no. I thought Frigga's death was so much more emotional. And that's also mainly because I kind of guessed that Loki's death wasn't going to stick. I figured, oh, it's either, you know, an illusion of himself, or, you know, he's faking it, or whatever. Like, I figured he's not really dead. So when Frigga died, I immediately felt it. I immediately just tugs at all the heartstrings. And I think I can say the same thing about everyone's acting in general. Everyone, I think, has gotten a really good handle on who their characters are and what they're portraying exactly. And I think everyone has a good enough chemistry with each other now where the ability to balance the really tough and aggressive and emotional moments with the lighthearted and more humor-filled moments. I think they're getting really good at doing that. So, and that's mainly a huge part on the actors, not only knowing their characters so well, but also interacting with other actors so well. Like when Natalie Portman is in Asgard and she sees Loki again, she just goes right up to him and slaps him in the face, and he's like, I like her. Like, they're just really good scenes with each other. There's also another spoiler I really want to talk about. it's one of my favorite cameos that I think I've seen in any Marvel movie, which is a huge thing to say because Marvel has a lot of cameos, like not only of Stan Lee, but his was actually pretty good in this movie too. But just of other characters, like the small little crossover that they still have with the other characters from the universe. So, you know, in Incredible Hulk, you know, Robert Downey Jr. showed up at the end. And even with the X-Men movies, when Wolverine shows up in X-Men First Class, I thought that was a great cameo. That was my favorite for the longest time. But now I think I have a new favorite. There's a scene where Thor and Loki are just kind of walking through Asgard, and they're basically planning this prison break, and they've already broken Loki out of prison basically, and they're walking along, and Loki is like badgering Thor, like he's kind of just poking at him, and he's like making these little snide jokes, and Thor is like, if you don't shut up, like we're gonna get caught. And so Loki begins to shapeshift himself and Thor, and one of the things that Thor shapeshifts into is a Sif, and it's really funny because all of a sudden you see Sif with Thor's voice, and it's just really funny to watch. And then the next thing that Loki shapeshifts into is Captain America, and it's hilarious because he just starts going off about pretending to be like American and I'm a patriot kind of thing. And he's like, God bless America. I just think it's the funniest cameo that Marvel's ever done. I think it's great. And I honestly wasn't expecting it. It was a cameo where it's like, I did not see that coming. Like, I really wanted a cameo from another Marvel character, and I got it. And it was awesome. Like, obviously it wasn't the real character, but they had Chris Evans on set in the suit with the shield just to do those, like, 10 seconds that he's on screen. And it's glorious. It's hilariously glorious. It's definitely not one of Marvel's best movies. I like when you think about the cinematic universe that Marvel has built up, there's a lot of ways that you can rank the films in terms of the ones that you enjoy the most. So for me, Avengers is at the very top because that I think is the best that Marvel has done, especially with the culmination of all the characters. And then after that, it comes, you know, Iron Man, Iron Man 3, Captain America, Thor, Iron Man 2, Incredible Hulk, you know, and I think for me, Thor the Dark World kind of fits between Iron Man 3 and Captain America for me. I enjoy it almost as much as Iron Man 3, but I feel like Iron Man had more of a legacy that it had to live. I feel like Iron Man 3 had more of a legacy it had to live up to versus Thor 2, which I think was still finding its zone that it can live in because the first one still kind of left us with this almost awkward scenario to be in. And one of the things that does kind of take me out of the movie a lot is this huge emphasis on the romance between Jane Foster and Thor. And I'm not saying that that's a negative in general. Like, it's fine that there's a romance. The thing I don't like is that they so heavily emphasize it. Like, it was a huge emphasis, obviously, in the first movie, but it's still a big emphasis in this movie. I kind of wish that they pulled back on it a little more. I feel like there's a little too many scenes that just kind of indulge in the romance too much, and they just kind of, and there's a lot of scenes where that's all what the Jane Foster is really about, where all she really does is focus on her relationship with Thor, and there's only like maybe a couple of scenes where she gets to be, you know, a scientist, where she gets to be herself, where she doesn't focus solely on her relationships, or she doesn't just focus on Thor. Despite the fact that she's a really intelligent woman, a lot of the things that she does now almost solely focus around Thor. Like one of the statements that Heimdall makes is that she's studying the convergence, which is basically this major event that is going to cause a lot of what's going to happen in the movie. She's studying it, but the reason she accidentally starts studying it is because she was looking for Thor. It's like, I kind of wish that she would just be a little bit more not necessarily selfish, but just a little bit more, you know, independent. Be like, you know, I still want to be a scientist. This is still something that I'm interested in. And I feel like I just feel like the justification now for her doing it is Thor. Like, the man is the justification. And I'm not honestly a strong feminist type. Like, I like, in terms of general feminism, yes, women deserve to be equal in pretty much every way as men in regards to what we're paid, our voting, whatever. I agree with all that. I'm not much on, you know, finding misogyny wherever I can find it, but I just kind of wish she was a little bit more her own person. You know, obviously the events that took place in the first movie and in the Avengers, they're major events, and the world would be so focused on them if something like that were to happen. So it's not exactly like it wouldn't be important to study it. I just kind of wish that it was less focused on her trying to find, you know, her boyfriend, kind of thing. Like, if you see where I'm coming from. The only other complaints I can really think of about this movie is I kind of wish the Warriors 3 had a bit more to do in this movie. Like, they're certainly much more active in this film than they were in the first. In the first, they basically had one or two major scenes. In this one, it's maybe 3 or 4. It's not much better than the first one. It is better, but not by much. They do have like major scenes where they're basically their prison break thing, but otherwise a lot of the rest of the scenes with them are just they just kind of pass by really quick. Overall, I really enjoy this movie. I think it's definitely, I think it's better than the first Thor movie. Some people disagree. Oh, and of course I have to talk about mid-credits and end credits scene. End credit is nothing special. It's basically just fluff and a little bit of, you know, it's sort of like the shawarma scene at the end of the Avengers. Like, it's not really important, but it is kind of funny, and if you stick around, and you just basically want to be a completionist almost of movies, because there's so many people that walk out before the end credit sequence because they watch the mid credit and they think it's over. They think that there's nothing else after that, and I'm like, you idiots. So I don't know if it's just sort of like I'm a completionist in a way, but with movies, like, you know how there's completionists for video games. I guess I'm just a movie completionist, but I'm like, you paid money for this. Why would you leave early? Unless you absolutely hated it, which I don't think anybody in my theater hated it. So the end credit sequence is basically just Thor comes back to see Jane, they kiss as soon as he lands, and then I forget what the creature's called, but the big sort of beast-like creature that's from Jotunheim, it's still on Earth from the major battle, because the battle sort of keeps going between dimensions, so it's really interesting to get to see all the different worlds of the 9 realms in this major epic battle sequence, which has a lot of really funny moments going through all the different dimensions, so we get to see more of the 9 realms, which is really nice. And the beast from Jotunheim ends up on Earth during this battle, and then at the very end it's really revealed that he's still running around and chasing birds and things like that, and it's really cute and funny. But the mid-credit sequence, which basically is the important one, is just leading up to Guardians of the Galaxy. You just see Sif and Volstagg going to the Collector for him to hold onto the Ether, which is this. It's basically one of the Infinity Stones that's going to be leading into Guardians of the Galaxy. So it's going to be interesting, and again, like, I never read much of Guardians of the Galaxy, but I know the Infinity Stones, and I know the Infinity Gauntlet. Like, I know what it's leading up to, so that's gonna be interesting. I think that's pretty much it. I think on Rotten Tomatoes, Thor: The Dark World is getting ranked at like a 66 right now. That was the last time I checked. Overall, I think the movie is probably a 75. Like, if it were me and I can give like a percentage rating, I think it's a 75. I think it's extremely entertaining, continues the series really well. I think the way it looks is fantastic, and I think Marvel's just been doing such a great job continuing these stories, and I'm always excited to see the next one come out. And even if the story isn't super strong, and even if there are a couple pitfalls in it, it isn't enough to really super detract from the overall experience of seeing these movies and seeing them in tandem with each other. So I like what it's leading up to, I like the way that these stories are developing, and I think if you're any kind of a Marvel fan, you obviously need to see this movie. So that's it for Thor: The Dark World, and now we're going to move on to the next review in this little series I'm going to be doing tonight. So I'll see you guys in the next review.